I had always been a skeptic. No, more than that. I thought all those ghost stories and tales of the supernatural were just that, stories. My friends loved to scare each other with their ghostly encounters, but I never bought into it. I lived in a world governed by logic, by what I could see and touch. And that's why when I moved into my new apartment, I felt completely unfazed by the strange rumors surrounding the building. They said it was haunted, that people had heard footsteps in the middle of the night, doors slamming on their own, and sometimes shadows that seemed to move when no one was around. I brushed it all off. But now, I wish I had listened. It was late, around 2 a.m., when the first incident happened. I had just returned from a late shift at the hospital, where I worked as a nurse. Exhausted, I stumbled into my apartment and, as always, locked the door behind me. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only noise that filled the silence, but even that felt eerie in the stillness. I chalked it up to exhaustion. The apartment was old, and the walls creaked with the sounds of settling, but tonight, something felt different. I threw my keys onto the kitchen counter and made my way to the living room. As I passed by the hallway, I stopped. Something in the air had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it, like a presence was watching me, something just beyond the corner of my eye, hiding in the shadows. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe. I headed into the living room and collapsed onto the couch, closing my eyes for just a moment. But the moment I did, I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound from the hallway. I didn't move at first. My heart started to race. Maybe it was just the building settling, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to ignore it. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A faint whispering, a low murmur, just outside my door. I froze. My body refused to move, my mind screaming at me to get up, but my limbs felt like they were paralyzed. I heard the whisper again, and this time, it was clearer. "Come closer," it said, the voice so soft, so eerily calm. "We're waiting for you." I had no idea what to do. The voice was coming from the hallway, from behind the closed door. I swallowed hard and gathered what little courage I had left. Slowly, I pushed myself up from the couch and moved toward the door. The apartment was deathly still now. No creaks, no hum of the refrigerator, nothing. Only the sound of my own breath, shallow and quick, echoing in my ears. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling as I turned it. The door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. The hallway was empty. No one was there. The air was thick with tension, the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness of the hallway, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. Confused, I stepped back into the living room, shaking my head. I must have imagined it. I must have. But as I moved across the room, my eyes were drawn to something on the floor. A small, black feather. It was lying there, out of place, as if it had been dropped intentionally, left there for me to find. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't own any pets. Where had it come from? I reached down to pick it up, my fingers brushing against the soft, cold surface. The moment I touched it, I felt a jolt of energy shoot up my arm, a sharp, electric shock that made my hair stand on end. I quickly pulled my hand back, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening around me. I could feel something just beyond the edges of my vision, lurking in the shadows. Then, a sound. It was a soft sound, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The faintest scratching, like nails dragging across the wall. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The noise was coming from the far corner of the room, where the shadows were darkest. I hesitated. There was no way in hell I was going to investigate that. But as I turned to leave, I saw something. In the corner of the room, just behind the couch, a figure stood. It wasn't fully human, though. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its shape was obscured by the thick darkness surrounding it. I couldn't make out any features, only a tall, thin silhouette. Its form seemed to shift, as if it was made of smoke, like it could disappear at any moment. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My breath caught in my throat. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply watched me, its presence filling the room like a heavy, suffocating fog. And then, it spoke. Asterisk, we are waiting for you, asterisk. The voice was not human. It was low, deep, reverberating in my bones like an echo from another world. The words were laced with malice, a command that chilled me to my core. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to acknowledge it, but I couldn't look away. The figure took a step forward. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The air around me grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming pressure, like something was pushing in on me from all sides. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to warp, stretching and bending like it was being pulled apart. In that moment, I realized this wasn't my apartment anymore. This wasn't a place I could just leave. Something had claimed it. Something had claimed me. The figure took another step, and I stumbled back, my legs finally working as fear shot through me like an electric current. I ran. I ran out of the room, down the hallway, and to the front door. But as my hand gripped the handle, I froze. The door was locked. I knew I had locked it before. Panicking, I turned the handle again. Locked. The keys were nowhere in sight. I turned around. The hallway behind me was empty. The figure was gone. But something had changed. The air was heavy now. Thick. The walls felt like they were closing in. I tried to call out for help, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. And then, a sound. A faint tapping, coming from somewhere behind me. Tap. 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 It was slow, methodical, like someone, or something, was making its way toward me, step by step. The noise grew louder, closer. My pulse raced as I turned toward the sound. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was there, moving toward me. I had no choice but to turn and run, my heart pounding in my chest, my feet moving faster than I thought possible. The tapping grew louder. Tap. 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 I reached the end of the hall, but there was nowhere to go. The room I had just fled from loomed in front of me, the door wide open. The tapping stopped. A voice, a whisper, came from the darkness. You can't run. And then, something cold, something alive brushed against my neck, sending a jolt of terror through my body. To be continued. I could feel it, the coldness, creeping up my spine, pressing against my skin like 1,000 icy fingers. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to move. The fear had a hold on me, squeezing the air from my lungs, making each breath feel like a struggle. And then, just as the breath caught in my throat, I heard it, soft, but unmistakable. A whisper. It was a voice, but not one I recognized. It wasn't human. It wasn't alive. It was distant, hollow, as if it came from the depths of some dark, forgotten place. A place where nothing should exist, yet everything does. You can't hide, the voice crooned. its words wrapping around my mind like thick, suffocating tendrils. It wasn't loud, but it felt close, too close. I could almost feel the breath on my neck, icy and dead. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs moving without thinking, propelled by the sheer force of terror. The hallway was empty. Silent. The dim light from the overhead bulb flickered erratically, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. Nothing was there. But I felt it. The presence, that unseen weight pressing down on me, lurking just beyond my line of sight. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I simply ran. My feet slapped against the cold, hard floor as I bolted down the hall, past the living room, the kitchen, and toward the front door. The tapping, soft, deliberate, was still there, only now, it seemed to follow me, echoing in the walls, in my head. Tap. 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 It grew louder as I neared the door. I reached for the handle, desperately twisting it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. The reality of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't leave. The apartment was a trap. And whatever was behind me, whatever was making that tapping sound, wasn't going to let me go. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as though it was thickening into something tangible. Something that could reach out and grab me. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. But the shadows, those shadows that never seemed to stand still, were moving. It wasn't just a flickering light, they were alive. They twisted and stretched, writhing in ways that made no sense, as if the very nature of reality was bending to something darker, something that shouldn't exist in the first place. The shadows on the walls seemed to reach for me, inching closer with every beat of my panicked heart. Then, it came again. That whisper. It wasn't in my ear this time, it was inside my mind. The words echoed through my skull like the taunting song of some ancient, forgotten creature. Asterisk, you can't run from what's already inside you, asterisk. I felt the words like an electric jolt, sharp and biting, sending a wave of nausea through me. My knees buckled beneath me, and I crumpled to the floor. The tapping was back, only now it was joined by something else, scratching, dragging, as if someone, or something, was clawing its way toward me, inch by agonizing inch. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sensation that something was just there, right next to me, standing over me, waiting for the moment when I would finally open my eyes and see it. But no matter how tightly I squeezed my eyes shut, I couldn't escape the feeling. I could feel it, asterisk them asterisk, in the room with me, circling me, moving closer. I could feel their cold, malicious presence, pressing against my skin, filling the room with the weight of their gaze. It knows I'm here. The whispers, the tapping, the scratching, all of it came together in a rising crescendo, a deafening cacophony of sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I could no longer tell where the noise was coming from. It was everywhere. It was inside my head. My heart thundered in my chest, and the air felt so thick now, so heavy, I could barely breathe. And then, it stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. The air cleared, the whispers faded, and the room seemed to fall into an unnatural stillness. But that stillness, that silence, was more terrifying than any sound. It was as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think straight. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the impossible, trying to force logic into a situation that had no place for logic. But nothing made sense anymore. Nothing felt real. The shadows on the walls, the cold that crawled beneath my skin, the whispers in my mind, it was all too much. Then, the door opened. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I thought my mind had finally snapped. But no. The door, my door, was slowly creaking open, inch by agonizing inch. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. But now, it was opening on its own, as if something from the other side was gently, methodically, pulling it open. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was on the other side. But my eyes betrayed me, and I turned, glancing at the open door. I didn't expect to see anything. I thought maybe I'd just imagined it. But no. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It wasn't human. It was tall, too tall. It was shrouded in darkness, its body barely visible through the thick blackness that clung to it. It was wrong. Its limbs were unnaturally long, twisting and bending at angles that defied nature. Its head was tilted, as if it was studying me, examining me, with eyes that I couldn't see but could feel. I knew they were there, watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare as the figure stepped forward, its footfall silent, but heavy, like the sound of 1,000 whispered prayers in a forgotten tongue. Each step was deliberate, measured, like it was savoring the moment. And then, in a voice that felt like it had come from the bowels of the earth, it spoke. You can't escape. You belong to me now, The words reverberated in my chest, like they were coming from inside me, tearing through the very fabric of my soul. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls narrowing, the ceiling lowering, as if the space itself was being consumed by the presence of this thing. And then, as if on cue, the shadows in the room began to writhe. They stretched and twisted, taking on forms that were too distorted to comprehend. I saw faces in the shadows, twisted faces, some that looked like people I had known, others that were monstrous, their features contorted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. I could hear them, too, their voices, whispering in unison, a chorus of voices that had no place on this earth. You will stay here, forever, And then, I felt it. A cold, bone-crushing pressure on my chest. It was as if something had reached inside me, pulling at my very essence, trying to tear me apart from the inside out. I gasped, unable to breathe, unable to think. The pressure was too much. My vision began to blur, and the room spun around me, the walls stretching and distorting like they were made of rubber. And then, everything went dark. To be continued. The darkness swallowed me whole, a thick, oppressive blackness that seemed to wrap itself around my mind, squeezing the air from my lungs. My eyes were wide open, but I saw nothing. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my ears, the rapid beat echoing in the silence of whatever this place was. It felt endless, this nothingness, as if time itself had come to a halt. My body felt weightless, detached, like I was floating somewhere between this world and something else, something darker. I wanted to wake up, to open my eyes and escape, but it felt like my body was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Then, a sound broke through the stillness. It was soft at first, like the distant murmur of wind through trees. But it grew louder, clearer, until I realized it wasn't the wind, it was a voice. A whisper. At first, I thought it was just the remnants of my own fear playing tricks on me. But no. It was too clear, too real. The voice was there, in the darkness, surrounding me, filling the void. You're not alone, The words slithered into my mind, as cold as ice, as sharp as a blade. The voice was low, almost soothing, but there was something insidious underneath. A presence, something malignant that was reaching for me from beyond the veil. I tried to speak, to respond, but no words came out. It was as though my mouth wouldn't work, like something had sealed it shut, forcing me into silence. But the voice didn't wait for a reply. It continued, swirling around me like a whispering wind. Asterisk, you'll never leave, asterisk. I couldn't move. I couldn't fight. The darkness wrapped tighter around me, pulling me in, suffocating me. I could feel something cold brush against my skin, something alive, like fingers, soft but unnervingly cold, running along my arm, my neck. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. No escape. And then, the darkness shifted. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. I could feel the space around me begin to change, to twist and distort, as though the very fabric of reality was bending. Shapes began to form out of the darkness, shadows that stretched and retracted, flickering in and out like flashes of light. They were faint at first, just silhouettes, but as my senses began to adjust, I could see them more clearly. The shadows were moving. They weren't just shapes, they were figures, but not human. Not entirely. They were like twisted reflections, malformed and broken, their features shifting and contorting in ways that made my stomach churn. Some of them had long, spindly limbs, too long for their bodies, twisted and unnatural. Others had faces that were not faces at all, but voids, black holes where their eyes and mouths should be. The only thing that remained constant was the feeling of them, like they were watching, like they were waiting. And then, one of them moved closer. It slithered toward me, its form undulating as it moved through the blackness, its limbs stretching and contracting like elastic. The closer it got, the more defined it became, and as it neared, I could see its eyes. Not eyes, really, but empty sockets that seemed to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly glow. They were watching me, unblinking, unfeeling. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey, frozen in place, held captive by its gaze. Asterisk, you can't escape, asterisk. The voice came again, but now, it was louder, more forceful. It wasn't coming from just one of them. It was coming from all around me, echoing from every corner of the darkness, vibrating in my bones. My head was spinning, my breath shallow and erratic, and I could feel my pulse racing in my throat. The figure reached out a hand, if you could even call it a hand. It was long and gnarled, like a branch twisted by the wind, but with fingers too long, too many fingers, and they were cold. So cold. I could feel the ice creeping into my skin as it touched me, the cold sinking into my bones, draining the warmth from my body. Asterisk, you are ours now, asterisk. The words felt like a curse, a sentence, as if they were being etched into my very soul. I couldn't shake the feeling that this thing, this presence, had been waiting for me. Watching me, perhaps for years, following me from place to place, biding its time, until it finally found the moment to strike. I jerked away, trying to move, trying to escape, but I couldn't. My body was still frozen, paralyzed by the fear that gripped me. The figure leaned in closer, its face now inches from mine, the empty sockets glowing in the darkness. I could feel its breath, or what passed for breath, cold and clammy against my skin, like the brush of 1,000 dead leaves. I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up, but there was no escaping this. This was real. This was happening. I felt its cold fingers wrap around my wrist, tugging me forward, pulling me through the dark void. It wasn't physical, not in the way I understood it. It was a force, an unseen grip that squeezed tighter with every passing second, dragging me further into the abyss. The deeper I went, the more the shadows pressed in around me, wrapping themselves around me like chains, pulling me into their suffocating embrace. I felt something at my feet. It was like being dragged over rough, uneven terrain, my shoes scraping against a cold, stone surface. I stumbled, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in my surroundings. Was I on the ground? Was I still in the apartment? It didn't feel like it. But then I heard it. A voice, clear and sharp, like a crack of thunder in the stillness. The words weren't whispers anymore. They were commands. Asterisk, come closer, asterisk. The voice was coming from ahead of me. It was different, not like the others. This one was more familiar, more human, yet it carried a weight to it, a sinister undertone that twisted it into something dark and twisted. I tried to ignore it, but my body moved on its own, drawn toward the voice as if it had become the center of my existence, the one thing I could focus on. The coldness intensified as I drew closer, until it felt like I was walking through ice. My breath came out in visible puffs, each exhale a cloud of frost in the air. I could feel the temperature drop, my fingers and toes going numb as I moved further into the darkness. I stepped forward, the sound of my feet crunching on gravel like stone echoing in the stillness, but the voice didn't stop. It was relentless, now commanding me to step further, to get closer. And, like an invisible force, it dragged me onward, against my will. When I reached the source of the voice, I stopped. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a thing. It was an altar. In the center of the dark, cold space stood a stone altar, worn by centuries of neglect. It was cracked, covered in dust, its surface stained with something that looked like old, dried blood. The air around it hummed, pulsed with a dark energy that filled my chest with an overwhelming sense of dread. On the altar, there were symbols, strange, foreign, ancient markings carved into the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light. And there, kneeling before the altar, was a figure. It was human, or it had been once. But it wasn't anymore. The body was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bones, and it was hunched over in a position that was far too unnatural to be human. Its hands, clawed and gnarled like roots, were pressed against the stone, as though it were worshipping it, bowing to it. I couldn't look away. I had to look away, but I couldn't. Something in me, something deep within me, was drawn to it. Drawn to the altar. Into the thing that knelt before it. Then, it lifted its head. It had no face. No eyes. No nose. Just an empty, hollow void in place of its face. And it spoke. Asterisk, it's your turn, asterisk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, frozen, paralyzed by the darkness. By the figures. By the feeling that there was no escape. No way out. The world around me began to spin. And then, the darkness took me. To be continued. The silence was all-consuming, suffocating. A darkness so thick, it felt like a living entity, pressing against every inch of my skin, squeezing the very breath from my lungs. It wasn't just the physical absence of light, it was an absence of everything, as if the air itself had vanished, leaving me in a void. I was weightless, floating, yet anchored by an invisible chain that kept me tethered to this place, this otherworldly place. I had no idea how long I'd been here, how long I had been drifting through this endless black. The passage of time had lost its meaning. Minutes, hours, days, perhaps, had become an alien concept. I could no longer tell if I was awake or trapped in some endless nightmare. It felt like an eternity. The cold crept deeper into my bones, a biting, unnatural chill that gnawed at my very soul. But I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was a prisoner to the darkness, to the force that had taken me, that thing I had seen, its glowing eyes, its unnatural form, its voice. My senses were being stretched and twisted, contorted by the gravity of this place. I tried to speak, to call out, but the words never left my lips. The silence swallowed everything. But there was something else now. A faint hum. Low at first, barely noticeable, but gradually growing louder. It was the sound of something stirring in the blackness, something alive, or maybe dead. Its presence felt as a weight on my chest. I wasn't alone here. I couldn't pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was closing in. A soft scraping, like nails running against stone, echoed through the vast expanse. Then, a whisper, clearer now, slithered into my ear, as if it were coming from inside my mind. "You cannot escape." I froze. My body went rigid, a jolt of cold fear coursing through me. The voice, low and venomous, reverberated inside my skull, like a thought that wasn't my own, seeping into the very fabric of my consciousness. The same voice I had heard before, but now, more commanding, more tangible, as if it had taken physical form in the air around me. The scraping sound grew louder, and with it, a deeper rumbling, a sound like a distant growl, low and primal. It wasn't just a voice. There were others. I could feel them, their presence, as if the shadows themselves were alive, swirling and moving, watching, waiting. I tried to move again, but my limbs felt like they were made of stone. My muscles refused to obey. I was trapped, paralyzed in place, a mere spectator to whatever horrors were unfolding around me. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, echoing in the oppressive silence, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something else was drawing closer. The shadows shifted. A flicker of movement caught my eye, something in the distance, a figure, just a shape at first, barely visible against the inky blackness, but it was moving toward me, fast. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, like spider legs, bending at impossible angles. The more it moved, the more grotesque it became, its body contorting and writhing in ways that were wrong, unnatural. I wanted to turn away, to look anywhere but at that thing. But I couldn't. It was like a force pulling my gaze, like I was being drawn to it against my will, forced to witness whatever this was. As it neared, I could see its face, or what passed for a face. It was a hollow, featureless mask, its skin stretched tight over an elongated skull. Its mouth was wide, too wide, stretching across its face like a grotesque grin, exposing rows of teeth too sharp, too many. Its eyes were empty sockets, black and endless, but there was something within them, something that knew me. It felt like it was reading my soul, seeing my thoughts, twisting them into something dark and awful. I wanted to scream, but the air was thick with a pressure that made it impossible to draw breath, as though something invisible was pressing down on my chest. My throat closed up, my voice lost in the suffocating atmosphere. The figure continued to move toward me, its limbs jerking with unnatural speed, twitching in spasms that didn't belong to any living creature. I could hear the scraping of its fingers on the stone ground, each movement sending ripples of horror through the air. The closer it got, the more the air seemed to vibrate with an unnatural hum, a dark energy gathering around us. It reached out a hand, or something like a hand, its fingers elongated and twisted like branches from some dead tree. Its touch was cold, so cold, that the instant it made contact with my skin, I felt my body freeze. I couldn't move, couldn't react. My muscles locked in place, and I was paralyzed in its grasp, unable to pull away from its chilling touch. "You cannot run," the voice repeated, echoing through my mind. "You belong to us now." I wanted to scream, to break free, but my body was no longer my own. The figure's grip tightened, sending a jolt of ice through my veins. My eyes blurred with tears, my vision swimming as the world around me began to distort, twisting like a funhouse mirror. The shadows in the corners of the room grew thicker, more oppressive, pressing in from all sides. I could feel the walls closing in, the ground beneath me shifting, changing. I felt the weight of it all. The pull of the shadows, the suffocating presence of the thing that had taken me. The coldness, the unnatural quiet, the feeling that I was being watched by something that wasn't human, something beyond human understanding. And then, something broke through the haze of fear, something sharp and clear. The whisper. "You're almost there." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a statement. It was a command. Before I could react, the darkness around me shifted. The space I was in began to break apart, like fragments of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting something different, something wrong. The shadows twisted and warped, forming faces that were not faces, bodies that were not bodies, all pressing in on me, drawing closer, suffocating me. The figure still held me, its grip cold and unyielding, but now I could see it clearly. It was here, right in front of me, its grin widening impossibly. Its eyes, empty and black, seemed to devour me with their gaze. The walls were closing in faster now, and I could hear the faint sound of chanting, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. The chanting grew louder, more urgent, until it was all I could hear. The sound, the feeling, it was like something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the ground beneath me gave way. I felt myself falling through the darkness, through the void, the endless abyss. My stomach lurched as the world around me twisted and turned, everything blurring into an incoherent mess of shapes and shadows. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was weightless, yet the feeling of falling was overwhelming. The darkness seemed to stretch out before me, endless and cold, swallowing me whole. I don't know how long I fell. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Time had lost all meaning in this place. All I could feel was the cold, the biting cold, and the weight of the shadows pressing against me, pulling me down. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the falling stopped. I landed hard on something cold, rough, and jagged. The impact sent a shock of pain through my body, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to know where I was. I opened my eyes. And there, in front of me, was the altar,